Morning, afternoon, and evening, everybody. Welcome to our Fantasy EFL Challenge, me versus Chris. And I've just realised I haven't uploaded the correct thumbnail, but we don't need the correct thumbnail, do we, Chris? Because this week, finally, I've got a victory.
You're off the mark. Look at you, with a big old smile on your face for the first time in 4 weeks it's been. So, yeah, congratulations. But I would just like to point out, of course, I was handicapped this week as per our rules. A win,
Whatever.
of course, is a win. But it's like when Liverpool won the Premier League during COVID, there's that little asterisk next to that victory.
No, there's no asterisk. Whatever you said, I'm stumbling over my words. There's no asterisk. A victory is a victory. Look, people don't tune in to listen to you and I banter each other. Very few people tune in at all. But as I've termed this is the show that we enjoy making much more than people tend to enjoy watching. So we're going to keep making it, even if it's literally just me watching it over and over again. Now we have a special guest on this week who we shall bring on in just a moment. But what I wanted to do before we go through our game week 6 teams and go into our game week 7 and bring in our super special guest, just thought we would go through the league at the moment. So this is the Stacey West League. We'll add that. I'm just going to go from top to bottom. So because some people have kind of said, well, we only do the top 10 and the bottom 10. So anything jumping out, just looking down there, we have a new leader in Mr. A. Jones. I see John Leonard, who is the Stacey West Quiz King, is third here as well. I think Dara Tracy, he was the winner of this week's game week. He was the winner of game week 6. Had a phenomenal week. That's pushed him up to 9th. 17th, look at that. Makama Chameleons, Ben Ward. So we're talking about this Stacey West challenge, and literally all 4 other members of the Stacey West are in like the bottom 15. There's Ben, tucked in 17th. He clearly knows more than all of us. Excuse me if I'm skipping over anybody. I'm actually looking for our guest today because I believe he is on. There's Matt Fenton. I think he's the sole representative of the new Lincoln City podcast. He's right up there in 39th. He's their new stats guy, Chris. So you've got a challenge there. Anything jumping out that you can see?
I mean, I'll be honest, I can't see it very well. So no. great video, isn't it, this? But I can't see it. All I know is that I am getting further and further towards the bottom, and I don't like it.
Well, we've got Kyle Fox there. So Kyle, again, friend of the site. He's in 56. Mike Scatless. So Mike and Jack Mulhall have a little thing going. So we've got Mike there. He's a long way below Ben. Mike, if you're watching, in 64th. Our special
esteemed guest in number.
Our esteemed guest is 68. We'll bring him in a minute. But the 1% Club, it's really interesting to remember that for when we come in. The 1% Club. Then you have Mr. Leffler at 75th, 4 points behind me. Jack is right on my tail. So there's a couple of people there tight in together. Charlie Beeston, definitely winning, definitely not winning. There's Substandard Liège, 84th, but you are 2 weeks down, aren't you?
I will be saying that every single week until the end of the season. Yeah.
And in Carl Beach's defence, I think he was 3 or 4 weeks down, so that's only a couple of weeks for him. And Stu Wells, who's our graphics guy, which is why I'm having to do a shared screen here, he is down in 87th. So that's the league. Congratulations to everybody who climbed. Commiserations to everybody who fell. But it's not always a fair game because we had a handicap this week. Or rather,
I had a handicap.
So your handicap was what?
So I was only able to select players that were selected by less than 1% of the overall player base of Fantasy EFL.
And was it a challenge?
Yeah, it was a real challenge. I have to say, it was more fun. And it would have been even more fun if it had come out and beaten you when you didn't have the handicap, but it didn't, sadly. But it was fun because it made you think outside the box a little bit in terms of your selections. So yeah, I enjoy. It's the most enjoyable week I had selecting my players, although it wasn't the most successful week I had, of course, in terms of overall score.
And how did you get the idea of the 1% handicap?
Well, this is because I was chatting to my old mate, Mr. Dean Gripton, who we're going to be bringing on in a moment, and this is a self-imposed rule of his for the whole season. So I imagine now is a good time to bring our esteemed guest in and let him tell us all about it.
onto the podcast or the video that we enjoy making more than you enjoy watching. Let's introduce one person who clearly does enjoy watching it because he is our first guest. His name is Dean Gripton, and he is Head of EFL Research at the phenomenally brilliant cultural juggernaut that is Football Manager. How are we doing, Dean?
Thank you very much. And a terrific introduction. Thank you. Very kind.
At all. So the 1% thing, how did that come about for you? What pushed you down that route?
Well, I was starting playing this game, and obviously the first week you're not really sure what's going on. And I picked a few players who I liked, a bit vibey sort of thing. And then, everyone started looking at Alfie May and people who were scoring the goals. And I noticed that, the same people were being picked in the first couple of game weeks, with 35-40% of people picking them. And I thought, well, I don't want to pick the same players as everybody else. I'll have a bit of a look. And I was watching on Saturday nights, the 1% Club with Lee Mack, and the idea hit me. Well, have a look. And I went on the site and noticed actually there's quite a lot of players that only 1% or fewer people are interested in signing. So I thought, well, I'll restrict myself to them, which will give me a little bit of a unique team, and also, maybe help me concentrate on looking at those other players. Obviously, in my job, I'm going to trying to be looking at all the players in all the divisions, keeping an eye on them. So, the Ethan Ampadu's and people like that we all know about. But I thought I'm going to be interested in seeing who Harrogate have got in defence and who Morecambe are playing in midfield and all that sort of stuff, and decided to pick a team from those.
Wonderful stuff. And in the first, we'll bring up game week 6 in a minute, but in the first 6 weeks, have there been any major success stories from the 1% Club?
Oh, well, the biggest one was last week, really, in picking Lee Gregory, who was only picked by 0.9% of players and scored a couple of goals for Mansfield. So, yeah, he's been the biggest success, really. And also the other one is a player you all know, Paul Farman in goal for Barrow. Of course, they had a couple of clean sheets, and he was in my team for 3 weeks until obviously he got sent off against Swindon, and that cost me that week. He was a minus score. But, Paul Farman was in my team for 3 weeks and got a couple of clean sheets.
Chris is smiling because he knows I backed Farman that day as well. The only reason he was sent off, Dean, and cost you points is because I backed him, because I am literally a curse and a Jonah. Absolutely. Right, let's have a look at these game week 6 teams then. There we go. So, first of all, Chris, take us through your your game week 6 team.
Yeah, so as mentioned before, this was a game week where I was under the 1% rule. Penalty, had a good time picking these players. Was pretty pleased with the decision to select Ghassan Hadme from Charlton, who hadn't scored, but had got good numbers, or reasonable numbers in terms of XG and things like that. And he did finally get off the mark, so I was pleased with that. Charlton did win. Sunderland, of course, losing to a last-minute winner away at Plymouth didn't help. Mr. Pereira not even getting a game for Reading didn't help either. And of course, the big miss here was Jordan Gibson, who I'd captained. So I think there was something like 30-odd% of people had picked Mr. Molyneux of Doncaster Rovers in their team. This was a Thursday night game last week where Doncaster visited struggling Harrogate. And I thought Doncaster would be a pretty decent bet for a positive result. I was unable to select one winger, but I thought I was allowed to select the other one, who had also put up half decent numbers. So I thought this could be a smart pick. I'll pick him, and I'll also captain him. And he got subbed off at half time in a 2-0 defeat.
Good. That's what we like to see. Now, obviously, while we were recording last week, our first game kicked off, and I was absolutely delighted to see Jordan Gibson go off at half time, your captain. So I did nudge ahead. Now, also worth pointing out, you had 11 points across your 2 teams at the bottom. I only had 5. But to be fair, I wasn't operating under the handicap. But a massive win for me this week, I think, was Josh Madger, who I captained. But I was also pretty happy with Ben Goodliff and Will Mannion. It actually left me 34th in the game week 6 table, believe it or not, which is highly unusual for me. But because the website's not functioning, I can't tell you how far down you were. But I do believe that Dean beat you. I can't add in the points up there. A good week. Dean, take us through your team, because there's some big scores in there.
Yes. I'll start with the two clubs because I think the clubs are really interesting. And one of the things I've picked up on playing the game is that you obviously get more points for away wins, especially if you can get a couple of goals with your away team. So I've been sort of looking at picking teams away from home, and that's where we went for Stoke, who'd won 5-0 at Borough in the League Cup, and they'd won at Plymouth in the league in their previous two away games. So I picked Stoke and watched them on Saturday lunchtime, and they were rubbish and got beat 1-0 at Oxford. So that doesn't prove that theory very well. Though Wickham did, of course, get an away win at Northampton and quite dominated them in that game. And so I was quite happy with that 9 points there. One of the other tricks as well of this game, I don't know whether you've been talking about it, is the vice captain and captain scenario, where if you pick a vice captain who's playing in one of the earlier games, you can maybe cheat a little bit and look at what you're going to do with the captain afterwards. And I had that dilemma with Lee Gregory, who scored 2 goals for Mansfield, got himself 13 points. He was one of my 4 players who got booked this week, so that cost me a little bit. But he got 13 points. And I was thinking, if I drop my captain, who's Sam Nombe, I could then maybe he would score nothing, but Gregory would, as the vice captain, get the double points. And I am denied about it, but I did fancy Nombe. Rotherham were at home to Burton, and before the game, he was 5th in League One for expected goals, but hadn't actually scored. He's really high on the key passes and touches in the box in ratings on FOTMob, and I really find something like FOTMob, also for Score, these sort of online websites which give you lots of data on players, really useful to look at which players are in form, which players are bringing up different points in different point scoring scenarios in EFL, in Fantasy EFL, including key passes and interceptions, those sorts of things. So I'd had a bit of a look and fancied Nombe against Burton, and he was quite involved in the game. He had 4 shots, 3 of them within the 8-yard box, and he had 8 touches in the penalty area as well. Created 1 chance, and his XG was 0.4 in the game, but sadly he didn't score, so I only got 2 points for him, and he got subbed off, and I lost interest in that game after that point. So yeah, it's all very, it's sometimes you can be a bit clever, and I was probably trying to be too clever last Saturday with that selection.
And also, Mr. Asgard there was a good point scorer in the middle of the park. Very few people backed Wigan really last week.
Yes, Asgard. Yes, he's had 3 really good weeks on the trot. He scored double figures in each of those 3 weeks. I know he's crept up above 1% now, so that gives me a little bit of a dilemma. But he's been terrific, and of course he'll be up against Lincoln City on Saturday with a Wigan side who won 4-0 at Bristol Rovers.
Yes, well, we'll come on to that in a short while when we do our game week 7. Yeah, quite right, because it has given us a little bit of a dilemma. Right. So, quick question there. You interested me. You said you could drop a player. So, if I picked a vice captain on a Friday and he does well, I can technically drop my captain. Can I?
Yeah. Yes. If you picked a captain who didn't play, such as Chris's goalkeeper there, Pereira, if you notice that somebody didn't play, or maybe you could pick somebody you know is absolutely injured, you could put them as captain, because they wouldn't play, they wouldn't score the points, and the vice captain would get the points. That's when the vice captain can score the double points, only if the captain isn't playing.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of a cheeky one. So it's one of those where obviously you pick your captain as the person you really think is going to score well, but maybe if you pick your vice captain as somebody who plays in a 12:30 kickoff, it might give you a little bit of an idea to, or a Friday match, something to think, oh, well, if he scores a few goals or scores a lot of points, maybe that's worth thinking. It adds a little extra dimension to the tactics anyway. That's right.
Yeah, that's cheeky. I'd argue, is that cheating? Is it just gamesmanship? I think
there's no cheating. If you're allowed to do it, if there is a function to do it, it's not cheating, unless it's Football Manager and you take over a second team to sell all of your players. I'm not saying I've ever done that. I'm not saying I've ever done that. But I have. Also, it's really interesting, the picks, I think, for the actual teams, because I think this is a really key dimension to this that puts it over and above Premier League EFL, because it's all well and good picking your players, but there's so many points to be had from those teams. Like with Chris, with 11 points, he's actually scored as many there as any two of his players put together, bar Ramsey and Ahadme. So that it's massive, isn't it? Like that, your teams become two of your biggest scoring players.
Exactly, and I must admit, I've been having another look into the how many players score different points, and I've dug up some really interesting information. And this is all available on the Fantasy EFL site when you just click on it, see who's got total points. I had a look at how many players have got more than 30 points so far this season, and there are 11 strikers who've got over 30 points. Do you know how many defenders have got over 30 points? There are 58 defenders got over that many points, and 15 of them got more than 40 points.
Wow.
And also as well, midfielders, 8 midfielders got over 40 points, and 49 of them have got over 30. So it seems like defenders and midfielders are the point scorers here, rather than you usually expect in fantasy EFL. Fantasy leagues and that sort of stuff, and everyone thinks about the Premier League, and you've got to have Erling Haaland in your team, and he scores all the points, sort of thing, and it's always about strikers. But I think Fantasy EFL is about the defenders and midfielders as much as the even more than the strikers this season.
I think that's a fantastic point. Yeah, so I always remember I don't do Fantasy Premier League anymore, but as you mentioned, it was pretty weighted towards attacking players. So even when you were selecting defenders, it was always trying to select defenders that were like a set piece threat or were penalty takers or set piece takers, just so they could get offensive points. So I imagine the rules have maybe shifted a little bit more. It's become slightly more complex now, but I think it's a really good point in that, because how the points are accumulated through midfielders, also including things like interceptions as well as key passes, defenders including things like clearances and tackles. I think that adds a really interesting dimension to this now.
Well,
so, think many points to be had.
Back when Premier League Fantasy Premier League first started, you always used to save as much money as you could for your strikers.
Yes.
So you'd skimp on your defenders, but you'd always pick the defenders who took the penalties. I remember having, David Unsworth was a great pick because he was always on the penalties. I can't remember if Julian Dix was actually a little bit. I can't remember if I ever had him. I had Dean Sturridge. He was my big striker pick. He was dead cheap one year in the 90s, and he absolutely smashed it for Derby. I came third in the McKechnie Plastic Components Fantasy League and won about 15 quid. It was sheer bliss. If a player got injured, you were lumped with 9 players for 6 months until you got to change it. Probably by mail. You had to probably email, send a letter off to the Mirror or whatever to change it.
And again, that's another one of the great things about this league. You can change your team every week, 7 different players each week. You can see who they're playing. If they're playing if Lincoln are playing a team you really fancy them to win, bang on and pop one of their players in.
Fancy Lincoln to win every week, Dean. Well, maybe not so. Right,
not outwardly, you don't. Maybe
not outwardly, I
don't.
don't know.
But you never publicly think we're going to win. Or very rarely.
I never say it because the thing is, you make a rod for your own back. It's like if I bring up my game week 17 in a minute and go, I'm definitely going to beat Chris, then it's not going to happen and people can criticize me. But before we do, there was a really interesting thing that's been picked up on this week's game, which I don't really want to put in the video because I don't want the likes of like Ben picking up on it if he watches the video. But Dean, you sent me an email beforehand. What is it that you've spotted that you think is a real game changer this week?
Oh yes. It's something as well that Chris has spotted, but some teams are playing twice in this game week, and I didn't notice it until I started trying to choose my team for this week, and it showed me somebody had 2 games, and I then looked down the game week fixtures and noticed there's 3 League One fixtures set for midweek, and they count in this week. So that means there's 6 teams who have 2 games, and they are Blackpool, Huddersfield, Leyton Orient, Peterborough, Stevenage and Wigan. So that means surely, as most players score positive points, very, very few players scored negative points. I think Farman's the only one who scored negative points for me this season. That makes me think that maybe I should be picking some of those players to play twice, especially, if their teams have got 2 good games this week.
Yeah, great spot, Dean. I have to admit, I normally send my team to Gary, as in fair advance of us recording. I don't think too much of it. I was pretty adamant this week that I didn't want to send my team to Gary until I had verbal proof that he'd already picked and submitted his team, because I thought I'd spotted something really smart and really clever that no one else would have spotted. Turns out you spotted exactly the same thing. So either that means that we are super smart, or it just means that we're not as clever as we think we are, and everyone else has spotted it as well. But as you mentioned before a minute ago, Gaz, you don't want certain people to watch this and then maybe get that benefit before the game week closes. Well, there you go. Those people that do watch it will get these sort of tips and tricks and the benefit of that. And those that don't watch it will miss out. And if they want to know why they missed out this week, maybe it'll encourage people to watch this next week. Who knows?
Shall we have a look at our teams? And there will be a graphic on the screen for a while now. I know Chris doesn't like it. He keeps sending in the private chat to take the graphic off so everybody can see him. But we're going to have the graphic on for a short while now. So these are the teams that we have picked. Now, I'll run through, as winner last week, I shall run through mine first, if that's okay. And we'll go to Chris, and then we'll go to Dean's 1% afterwards. And then we've got something special from Dean as well for everybody. So this week, I have, first of all, the two teams. I'm going to go with the two teams because there's 18 points to be had, and I want 18 points from those two teams this week because it's a great little start. Now, I haven't backed the teams that are playing twice because I'm not 100% sure. Peterborough, Bristol Rovers, it's on a knife edge. Huddersfield, Blackpool, not too sure. Northampton aren't a bad side. I think Leeds and Fleetwood are guaranteed winners this week. I really think they are. I think Cardiff are awful. And I think Leeds will beat them. Morecambe are terrible. They've got 1 point, and the only point they've got is when I backed against them last time when I backed Colchester. So Cardiff and Morecambe fans, your team are about to get their first win because I have backed them on the Fantasy EFL. Going through my team, you will notice that I have absolutely maxed out on those double matches. I've literally picked 6 players from 7 who are playing twice. So from Peterborough, I've gone for Jed Steer in goal. I thought he looked quite good actually against us this weekend. I imagine Bristol Rovers having some opportunities. I think that he'll make some saves in that game. I think he can keep a clean sheet against Leyton Orient. I'm backing Peterborough to kick on a little bit now. And Poku's the only decent outfield player they've got in terms of real standout performer. Really liked him on Saturday. At the back, I've lumped on Wigan, and I've gone basically with a Wigan man as captain. And if he doesn't play or he doesn't, whatever, I've gone for another Wigan man as vice captain. They're playing Stevenage and Lincoln, both teams that play quite a direct approach at times. And I think that they will be involved in lots of duels, lots of tackles, lots of blocks. You know, again, when we attack, we're quite fast in attack and defenders have to block quite a bit. So I've absolutely gone all out on them. And then Huddersfield as well. It's 2 teams. And literally, I'm the opposite to Dean. I am like the 100% club. I look at the 2 players that have scored the most points for Huddersfield on average this season. Not the most points overall, the most points on average for the weeks that they've played. And I've picked them. And then at the end, let's face it, Josh Madger had Chris crying into his WhatsApp on Sunday, I believe it was, when he scored in the first minute and gave me the points I needed to go ahead. So I'm sticking with my boy, former Sunderland trainee, Josh Madger. Mr. Lamming, what tactics are you employing to beat me this week?
Well, as has been mentioned a couple of times already, there are some special fixtures this week in which 2 teams play twice. Both Huddersfield and Peterborough are involved in 2 matches this week, and I think they're both involved in 2 winnable matches. So you mentioned that there are a potential 18 points available. There are actually a potential 36 points available from individual teams if they happen to win both games. Now, of course, I'm not expecting both teams to win both games, but I think they've got a reasonable chance. I think that there's 2 winnable games for both Huddersfield and Peterborough. Huddersfield are playing against Northampton and Blackpool. Peterborough are playing Bristol Rovers and Leyton Orient. I think they are winnable games. And so I've kind of backed them in the hope that they're going to pick up plenty of points in that. And I have ensured that I'm backing both of those teams quite heavily in regards to my player selection as well. So I have gone for Kwame Poku, again, real standout player. For Peterborough, I fancy he will have plenty of opportunities against both Leyton Orient and Bristol Rovers. Bristol Rovers do concede quite a lot of chances. Conceded the, I think, 3rd most touches in the box so far this season in League One. I've also got not the best expected goals against. So I fancy Poku to have some chances. I've also gone for Emmanuel Fernandez, who I've actually been really impressed with this season. someone who had hardly kicked a ball for Peterborough in the previous few seasons and has really stood out and grown into that role at centre-back. Now, Peterborough are often known as being really good going forward, a little bit loose defensively, but their defensive numbers are actually really stacking up this season, and Fernandez really stands out. With Peterborough playing 2 matches, I think there's opportunities there for him to get some plenty of points. And I've done a similar thing there in choosing 2 Huddersfield players. Josh Karoma, 5-goal involvements in 5 matches so far. And I expect him to have more of those against both Northampton and Blackpool. And then Mr. Hellick playing at centre-back for Huddersfield. Again, Northampton and Blackpool, and particularly now Blackpool, you expect to be a slightly more direct side. So imagine Hellick, who already scores positively for clearances, to have to kind of add to that as well. But also, importantly, the players get more points if they're in winning teams. And I fancy those players to get points for that as well. Now, I do have 3 other players. So I haven't doubled up on players that are playing twice. And I'm kind of kicking myself now, thinking I maybe should have gone for 1 or 2, particularly as we mentioned certain teams, certain players. I'm actually regretting picking one of these as we're talking, and should have put Carl Pidgiani in, I think. But I've gone for Tom Fellows of West Brom. West Brom are playing at home to Plymouth Argyle. Plymouth Argyle have got the 2nd most shots against and the worst XG against in the Championship. And Tom Fellows has got 5 assists from 5 games and has the highest number of expected assists in the league as well. So it's not a fluke, is what the numbers would suggest. And I have also gone for Hadji Wright. Coventry perform well in lots and lots of metrics. Hadji Wright has had the most touches in the box in the Championship, highest XG in the Championship. Swansea tend to be a little open at the back. And then last but not least, a player I've already selected, I think, twice so far this season. I'm becoming a bit of a Walsall fan here. Tommy Simpkin in goal. Walsall versus Salford. Salford lowest XG created, less than 3 goals created in the whole season so far, according to Y-Scout. And Walsall have got the 2nd best XG against. So if there's ever a dead cert of a clean sheet in terms of the numbers, I think this is the one. Cue a 1-0 Salford win. But that is my team.
Now, I'm just going to pick up on a couple of things before we go through Dean's. First of all, throughout that, Dean has been nodding away at your reasoning. So you've got the seal of approval from the main man, the main football manager man there. But I am also going to say, like you picked up on Tommy Fellows, I've got Josh Madger, which is really, it's the same sort of thing. But also I noticed that without prompting and without thinking about Dean's team, I've actually gone for the 3 at the back. And that's where we step over to Dean. He's obviously looking to squeeze every last % out of his 1%. Dean, take us through your side and your picks, mate.
I do like your both your teams, and I like the fact that Gary, there you've chosen 2 Wigan defenders. So I'm not sure how many goals you think Lincoln are going to concede, but that actually brings me to another point. Actually, that conceding goals isn't that much of a bad issue. I know you do get points for getting clean sheets, but you can still score plenty of points even if you concede goals. I mean, Owen O'Connell for Wrexham got 9 points on Monday night, and his team lost 3-1 because he got an assist. He had 6 clearances, 6 tackles. So it's about being busy in defence. Really busy defenders can get that. And Owen O'Connell scored more goals last week, more points than Anthony O'Connor or Harrogate, who got 8 points for a clean sheet. So, it's I think they're 2 interesting choices, and like that. And I think that both Kerr and Aimson will be busy, especially with clearances, against Lincoln on Saturday. And so they could rack up the points, and even if you win, so it'll be a double whammy for you. If you say get a Lincoln 2-0 win or something like that, you can still get Aimson and Kerr get a few points.
I'm not as confident now as I was 5 minutes ago.
I am.
And that's my thinking really with a couple of my defenders. I'm looking at Blackpool, and Blackpool are away at Charlton and Huddersfield, and I think there might be quite a lot of work for them there. But Steve Bruce coming in, there's been a few words saying about is this a good appointment or not? They started off well against Exeter with a win last week, and I think that they may do quite well in those 2 away games, but they'll be busy. And that's one of the key things there I've thought about in defence. And Afire is a young lad who's come on loan from Brighton and was man of the match against Exeter. And scored really well on the defensive metrics according to FotMob, and so he's coming as my choice, and he's 0%. I'd love to know exactly how many people have picked some of the 0%, whether they actually have been picked by nobody at all. That would really be a really interesting thing to see, but sadly it doesn't go that far. But so similar to that in goal as well, I've gone for Mahoney at Stevenage. Again, they've got 2 away games at Huddersfield and so I'm just forgetting who the away game is. They've got now Wigan, and again Mahoney's had a good start to the season in there. I think he's got 3 clean sheets. Stevenage give up very little XG in open play, and of course the game against Lincoln the other week where Lincoln did win 1-0, but there was a Rawn free kick and a Moylan penalty with the only shots on target Lincoln had, and the XG against them was 0.00 in open play, and a very low XG against them against Burton and Shrewsbury as well. So yes, 3 clean sheets in 5 for Mahoney, and hopefully some shots for him to save as well. So yeah, gone for him in goal. Jack Curry is another player who made his debut last week. Obviously last week was the first full game week for lots of players moving after the August transfer window. Curry came in on loan from Oxford with a big reputation from his time at Wimbledon, and Leighton Orient did pick up with that surprise win at Reading. But so they're another one of the teams with 2 games in this week. They're away at Stockport and Peterborough. Again, away at Stockport, home to Peterborough. I expect them to be busy, but Curry's a player who gets forward a lot from left back as well. So I'm hoping he might get some of those pass metrics in as well. So I've really gambled with my defences here. I've gone for players in teams I think might be quite busy, but also and players who haven't really scored much this season. All of them only playing their 2nd game in the back, because Katonga is another new player signed on loan from Man City for Peterborough, and hopefully I'm really looking at those to make a bit of an impact, and there'll be players who have been a bit under the radar and haven't really caught the eye of any other Fantasy EFL managers. And
obviously Jay Stansfield will have caught the eye of a few people, but still falls into the 1% club.
Well, I was a little bit cheeky. I went online on Wednesday morning as soon as the teams were there, and noticed that he was still on 0.9. I think if I had a look now, he might be a little bit more above that. But as I picked my team then, I thought, well, he's less than 1%. I'm going to go for him, and I have to captain him because I'm a Birmingham City fan, in case anyone wasn't aware of that. And obviously thrilled by the game against Wrexham on Monday night. And I'm going to Rotherham on Saturday, and I'm really hoping that Jay Stansfield is going to score in front of me. But I think, he could well score a lot of goals this season, and I might not get much of a chance to pick him, really.
Believe it or not, he's actually at 1.8%. So he's only crept up a little bit. And we did notice that Will Mitson, who is one of our regular Stacey West players, actually picked him and captained him for this weekend. So that was a massive pick indeed. So we'll lose that graphic for now. So, Chris, you've seen and heard Dean's reasoning. How confident do you feel at the minute?
Well, I think I feel quite lucky, the fact, particularly this week, that I don't have to adhere to the 1% rule. Now I'm no longer 3 points ahead of you. So I think it would have been much, much, much tougher this week to try and find those players that do fit into that rule that are still playing twice. I think Dean's done a superb job. We're really interested to see how those defensive metrics come out, because a lot of it's theory now. We've got, as you mentioned, Dean, you've done a bit of research into the early game weeks, and it shows that there's certainly a lot of balance in terms of the point scoring from defensive metrics as well as attacking ones. But I think, this is brand new this season for everybody. We're all learning it as we go. So I'd be really interested to see, particularly with 3 defenders who are, let's be honest, as it stands right now, you're expecting to be busy, maybe not always expecting to be on the winning side, but expecting to get good scores in terms of clearances, tackles, etc. Be really interested to see how that actually counteracts the potential scoreline, and that might really impact my decision making going forward. So I'll be honest, I was pretty damn confident before we started recording. I'm not as confident now as I was before, but I'll be honest, guys. I think between you and me in our little battle, I think this could be a tight one this week.
Well, I think so, because you've got the extra games for Huddersfield and Peterborough, but I've then got 2 players who are playing extra games as well. Now, if Huddersfield and Peterborough draw and it's 2 points apiece, that kind of gives me the nudge on the players, I think. So, Dean, I don't like to put you on the spot, but looking at the two teams, who would your prediction be, do you think, for me v Chris this week?
Oh, that is putting me on the spot, isn't it? It is putting. I like your three defenders, and Hellick, obviously for Huddersfield, has got real potential. They've got 2 home games this week, and you presume he would be a big point scorer this week. He'll be in a lot of people's teams, I think.
Which we've both got. So that is classic sitting on the fence thing. I like that. I respect that. I do respect it a lot. Now, we're over the 30 minutes, but we've got something else a little special because Dean has also gone through and selected an alternative set of players to keep an eye on, which we're just going to have a quick look at. So if you haven't selected your team as yet, you're about to get a treat because there is now even more players that you could select. Dean, just take us through this and through the team picks at the bottom as well.
Yeah, team picks at the bottom. Sheffield United are at home to Derby, and it's a bit of a straightforward one. It's not an away win, but Sheffield United have been so good this season. They were terrific at Hull last week, and have got Gus Harmer playing really well. And I think they're looking to be a shoe-in against Derby, who've had a good start, but all their points have been at home so far this season, and they might find that as a tough away game. And Oxford are going to be very much looking forward to their trip to Bristol City with Liam Manning under a little bit of pressure at Ashton Gate, and Oxford have defied the critics with 3 home wins this season, and I fancy them to get an away win at Bristol City this week. And of course, away wins do get you more points.
Of course, and that's actually a big game, isn't it? That's a big game for Liam Manning, thinking about it, after binning off Oxford as well. So, sorry for jumping in. So if you want to take us through your pick, 3 at the back again. Nice.
Yeah, 3 at the back. And again, in goal, we're looking at a team who did move quite well last week with the win. But again, Wycombe have changed their setup a bit this season. They're playing a lot more football, and they've changed their style. And Rabbit Soley in goal he's come into the team last season after not being the first choice last season in goal. His save percentage on FotMob is 90%. He's in the top 96% of goalkeepers for his saves. So that means saves get you lots of points extra in Fantasy Football League. So I'm looking at that, and he's conceded just 3 goals from 4.39 expected goals on target. So all these saves are adding up for good points. So yeah, I quite fancy Wycombe Wanderers this weekend. And again, I've also gone for some of the defenders. I've gone for the 3 defenders as well. And the first one I really want to talk about is, again, another player who people might not have heard of so much. He's a left back on loan from Liverpool to Blackburn Rovers called Owen Beck, who is on the 99% percentile for chances created for midfielders in the Championship. But he's listed here as a defender. He plays that sort of like left wing back role for Blackburn, and he's also on 93% in the top. He's 93rd percent highest in the defensive actions as well. So really looking forward to watching him play on Sunday on the live television game against Preston away, where Blackburn have made such an amazing start to the season, and Beck flying down that left side. I quite fancy him to do well this weekend, and as well for the rest of the season, because some of these are tips, not just for this week, but sort of players to look out for the rest of the season, really. Also at the back, Connor Hall for Port Vale. He's really high up on a lot of the defensive metrics, and Port Vale, after a couple of iffy results, did get a 4-1 win at Newport, followed by a win over Chesterfield, and are really beginning to look strong defensively. And Hall, the big strong centre back there, is a big part of that for them. So I expect Port Vale to carry on their climb up the table this season. And I've also gone for not such a young player and quite a famous player as far as Sheffield Wednesday are concerned, Liam Palmer, who's come in to the side after being left out a couple of times by Danny Roll. He's come back in and plays in that position on the right of a back 3 for Sheffield Wednesday, and they look stronger against QPR last week. They're away at Luton tomorrow on Saturday, which is again another difficult game, but again fitting that criteria I've been talking about this week of busy defenders. Liam Palmer is always in there with interceptions and blocks and tackles. He's a really brave player and really gets involved in that sort of thing. So yeah, Liam Palmer as well. He's a player who likes getting forward too. So I think he'll get a lot of points for Sheffield Wednesday this season. Again, so we'll look in the midfield here. Another player who no one had really heard of much this season is Romain Mundle at Sunderland. Sunderland had such a really good start to the season. Obviously, their unbeaten one went at Plymouth last Saturday, but Mundle was on the score sheet there. And he's really become a player who, has become an important part of Sunderland, especially after Jack Clark left. They wondered who they'd replace him with, and he's come into the team and scored a lot of points. I was really surprised to see how low he was on the percentage of people selection, and I expect over the next few weeks that a few more people will be picking up on Mundle. Another midfielder in there, and again, looking at the midfielders, they do score a lot of points from defensive actions as much as attacking actions, and there are quite a few midfielders of that sort of ilk in the division who are sort of defensive midfielders who in the Premier League, fancy leagues, they're just pointless. No one has them because they don't score any points, but in this league they do. And so I'm looking at there's a number of people in there, like Cole Winchester at Shrewsbury. He's got 32 points this season and he's only had one shot. He scored his one shot, but he's got himself 32 points with interceptions and blocks and that sort of thing, and key passes as well. And Owen Bailey at Doncaster has got 9 key passes so far, and he's got 32 points this season. So these are, there are a lot of players who are sort of very under the radar players who scored a lot of points through that sort of, those sort of midfield defensive actions. So Franco at Swansea is another one of those sorts of players who, again, has come in this season and a bit of an unknown player, but he's in the top 94% for defensive actions, and he's got 2 interceptions in each of the last two games to get him extra points there. He's becoming a key man for Swansea, and a little bit of a cult hero he's going to turn into, I think, down in South Wales. And they're away at Coventry this weekend, and again, I think he'll be really active with Coventry probably having a lot of the ball in that game, so that will mean a lot of chances for him to get some defensive actions. But he does get it forward a little bit as well, and Franco, I think, might be a player who will catch the eye in the next few weeks for Championship watchers. And up front is a striker who I must admit, I would have thought, maybe it would have been a good signing for Lincoln this summer. He'd left Shrewsbury on a free transfer and turned up at Wickham. Daniel Udo. He scored the winning goal against Northampton last week, and he's got 3 goals so far this season. He's a talented player. He's quick and he's strong, and he leads the line quite well. And I do like Udo a lot. And again, I was really surprised to see how few people have selected him. Maybe it's because Wickham are not a fashionable team really, and I think there are some real gems to be had amongst the unfashionable teams in this game. Anyone can look at Alfie May and players like that, and players at Leeds United and those sorts of teams. People always look for straight away as, I'll get some from Leeds because they'll win games. I'll get some from West Brom because they'll win games, and all those sorts of teams. But I think you can really get some bargains, especially on a week by week basis, by looking at players like Udo.
You've convinced. I wish I was doing 1% every week now. I literally listen to that and I'm just thinking, he's brilliant. There's me going, I'll just pick Josh Madger because he scored last week. But yeah, no, absolutely fascinating. Although on Daniel Udo, I could never bring myself to pick him after watching the 4-on smash he did on Adam Jackson at Shrewsbury.
Sorry about that.
Well, you didn't do it, Dean, so you're all right. But it wasn't nice at all.
But that's the thing I really enjoy about this game is there are so many stories. There's 72 teams here, and there's so many stories and great players. And players who are who are making their name in the EFL. There's a Hashi at Blackburn, the Japanese player who no one had heard of. He's got 3 goals, and he's chosen by only 0.5% of players as well. So he's somebody again to watch on Sunday in that game against Preston, and looks a terrific signing.
Fantastic stuff. Well, look, we've run well over at the minute. And we've done that because of Dean's absolute passion for EFL, which is brilliant. So look, if you are watching this at home, please do remember, like and subscribe and do all of that, or just watch it twice so that we think that at least more than 30 people are watching it, because the amount of fun that we have in this, I am absolutely delighted to say, is reflected back in Dean. So there are at least 3 of us that care passionately about Fantasy EFL. So before we say goodbye, Chris, any final thoughts on game week 6 or 7?
I'm nervous now. I was confident, so confident that I didn't want you to see my team early, and now I'm not. Now I'm not as confident as I was. But
the last time you were nervous, you'd picked Mickey Demetriou and you got the 3rd win in a row, didn't you? So the last time you weren't confident, you absolutely smashed it. I'm not as confident
interesting now. By the way, Mickey Demetriou is the highest scoring defender in the whole game. 58 points so far. Yeah.
That makes him the highest scoring player in the whole game.
Does it? My goodness me.
Yeah.
And you've picked Fernandez, who didn't even start for Peterborough this week.
He came on at half time, though. So I think Darren Ferguson, for the first time in the league this season, didn't start him, realised he made a mistake and brought him on at half time. So I'm backing him to start in these next 2 games.
Well, I, as always, cannot be confident. I still haven't won under normal conditions. I've only won under the handicap. Neither of us should be confident with Dean above both of us in the league operating on 1%. Dean, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. And we would love to have you on again if it doesn't dwindle to just 3 people watching in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed watching your podcast, which is why, I contacted Chris in the first place. So, I love the detail you go into it, and it's fantastic.
Brilliant. I actually don't care if only 20 people watch it. If there's just a handful of us that keep doing it and enjoying it, because I really do. I was passionate about this. We started it as an audio podcast on the terrace, and it just didn't know if there was the market for it. So we thought we'd play on the Me versus Chris with the Stacey West, but who knows? Fantasy football podcasts do take off, and this EFL game will only get more popular as time goes on. Dean, once again, thank you so much for your time, mate. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Dean out briefly. Right, so that was the Fantasy EFL podcast. Gary has finally got a victory. My arms look huge when I do that. Look at them. They look like they go on forever, don't they? They look massive. They look like they could reach out of a toilet bowl. Anyway, we shall... private joke. So we shall be back next week on the show that we enjoy making more than you enjoy watching, but all that remains to be said is I'm on the leaderboard, Chris.
Congratulations.
Up
substandard the edge.
Substandard what?